Roller Derby Girl Gang, an art anthology, is available now. Check out the link in the description to find out more. This is a review of The Art of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I'm really excited to share this one because the last review was on the art books for Legend of Korra, which were just so boring and disappointing, and in that video I kind of mentioned how that's kind of typical for most art books for animated series, so for this video I was determined to show something that's the complete opposite and shows how amazing TV animation art books can be. An interesting similarity though between this and the Korra art books is that both shows are from the same studio and the books are from the same publisher, but yet they couldn't feel more different. Also, I'm a huge fan of Korra, but I have never seen a single episode of this TMNT series, nor am I a fan of TMNT in general. Not because I think it's bad or anything, but just because I've never got into it. And the reason I wanted to establish that I'm not a fan of the show is because I hope it will add real impact when I tell you that this is, without competition, my all-time favorite art book for an animated series. Though I do seriously suspect that not being familiar with the show actually contributed to my enjoyment because everything was completely new and exciting and without expectation. But the reason this book is so awesome is very simple. It's because both the content of the art on display and the book design are both outstanding and work together to create one of the most fun, visually exciting art books you'll ever come across. Which is so important to how the book reflects the spirit of the show. The best way I can describe it is that reading this book feels like being a kid on Saturday morning. It's no school, in your pajamas, giant bowl of sugary cereal with a prize inside the box, and watching cartoons where over the course of 2 hours you go from aliens to pirates to dragons, spies, kung fu robots, and even the toy commercials. It's all such a rapid, overwhelming, in-your-face, varied, colorful, blissful experience, and that's exactly what this book is. I don't think I've ever seen any art book for one production that has such an extraordinary and varied visual palette. The quality, both in terms of the art and the ideas, are so wonderful. It is impossible to be bored reading this book, and it really mirrors that eclectic, imaginative nature of Saturday morning television I just described, where it seems like the goal is just a constant, rapid-fire barrage of the coolest stuff the creators can imagine. So in terms of the content of the art on display, I could be wrong about this, which again is why I wanted to be forthcoming about my lack of familiarity with the show, but my impression is that it's essentially the best of the art created for all 5 seasons of the show. The book gives very few explicit indications of where or when most of the art is from, so if you are a fan, it's probably a good idea to pay close attention and try and assess how representative the shown art is of the series as a whole. The book's not organized by seasons or episodes, but rather each chapter collects visually or thematically similar works, so more like the way an art book for an animated movie would be. So there's a chapter on New York, inventions and tech, one on the Foot Clan, one on aliens, one on monsters, on human friends and allies. There's a chapter on storyboards and a really cool little chapter on sort of ancillary and promotional art that was created around the show. But my absolute 2 favorite chapters that I think define the book are the chapter on like the pop culture within the show, so fake movie posters and videotapes, the comic books they read, the video games they play, the snack products they have in this world. And then the big standout one that gets its own chapter is for the cartoons the Turtles watch. It's like having half a dozen 2-page art books for fake animated shows within the book, and that's such a fun love letter to animation and really echoes what I was saying about this book feeling like a Saturday morning. The sheer amount of rich visual world building is something I was not expecting from a show like this, but it's what really stood out to me as being so wonderful and immersive that it really defines the book. It's all the highly detailed props, the graffiti, the signage, and especially the ephemera and fake posters and such. In fact, in his foreword for the book, Kevin Eastman, the original creator of TMNT, there's a part where he's discussing what he found impressive about the show, and he says, "The backgrounds, the sets, the lighting, every single street sign had this exacting detail that ripped through every frame. Personally, therein lay the beauty. Every detail had been thought about and addressed, every one of them. When you sink your teeth into this incredible book, you'll see what I mean." And he's not lying. Detail really is the word to describe the art in this book, and I get the impression that this is all very much a product of Ciro Nieli's sensibilities. Ciro is not only the showrunner and a very talented artist, but also the creator of this book, and you do get a strong sense of his influence on the art, the show, and the direction of this book. And to echo Kevin Eastman's quote about the detail, I'll also read one of Ciro's where he's discussing the use of graffiti and visually detailing the world. Throw-ups, burners, and bombs drape every inch of the city. Stickers and tags wrap around even the smallest of structures. This was necessary to give the city a beating pulse, a living, breathing place full of creativity. While the CG textures are amazing, the lack of graphic hand-drawn elements laid over top just felt lacking. This was the most important touch for me. Again, very true, 100% agree. I mean, I don't know how true that is of the show, if that's a defining element, but for this book, absolutely. Though comparing the art in this book to the clips I have seen of the show does prove that it would have been much better as a 2D cartoon, though that's true for 95% of 3D animations. But anyway, speaking of Zero, all the text is written by him, so he's the only person we get commentary from, and that's fine. Though this might be something that may disappoint some fans a little bit, that there's not a lot of text. So you're not going to be getting a ton of behind-the-scenes information about the making of the show, so don't be expecting that, especially because the text that is there is hit and miss. About half the time it's quite mundane and worthless, but the other half is great little bits of trivia and references, creative decisions, and quite a bit of focus on inspirations and where ideas came from or why they were changed, which is always really good. Though it's important to understand that even this interesting stuff really only amounts to one sentence trivia per couple of pages, which is fine just as long as you're expecting that. But I will say, personally, even if I was a big fan, I for one would not want any more text, even if it was good, if it meant having to have less art, because as you've hopefully noticed as we've gone through so far, there are a zillion pieces of art in this thing, and that's just so good. This is where we have to talk about the other mighty pillar that is making this such an amazing art book, and that is the book design, which is spectacular. No, not spectacular, literally perfect in my opinion at any rate. Well, except for the cover, which is more than fine, but I think it could have been a lot better. But the interior, stunning and handled so well. Though this is quite a subjective opinion, because when it comes to book design, I am a big sucker for the scrapbook style which this book uses. This controlled, chaotic scrapbook design with its images overlapping allows for so many more pieces to be packed onto every page, which is so important when you're talking about a book that covers 124 episodes of a show. You want as much as possible in order to feel like you're not missing out on stuff. And yet not a single image in the book is too small nor too large. Everything is perfectly balanced and sized appropriately. You may have noticed there are no borders or margins of any kind. Everything runs right up to the page edge, and so visually every page is stunning. There's nothing wrong with an art book that just slaps art on a white page and lets the art carry itself. That's what the Korra art books did, and as long as the size and layout are good, that's all any art book needs to be successful. But I just can't stress how much of an important impact it has on a book like this, where the design is going above and beyond in order to heighten the experience. And this is a perfect example where book design is being used to complement the feel of the art. They go hand in hand to make this such a fun book. It's not even 2 years old yet, and yet it's become my go-to book when I want visual stimulation, something creative and inspiring, or just some fun, awesome stuff to look at. And because of the crammed, collage-style layout of the book, it's so visually overwhelming that it's impossible for your eyes to absorb each piece with the attention it deserves, because, again, to use another childhood analogy, it's like going into Toys R Us. It's almost too much for your eyes/brain, but in the best possible way. And it means that every time I come back to this book, I feel like I discover something new, as opposed to a lot of other art books where it's like, well, that's great art, but I don't feel like I ever need to come back to that book again. Like, Korra has some of the best design work I've ever seen in animation, but the books and their choice of art were so bland, lifeless, and boring, whereas this book exudes creativity and energy. And I do acknowledge that's not exactly a fair comparison given the different visual and tonal directions of both shows, but the point still stands even when compared to 90% of other art books. However, at the beginning of this video, I very deliberately described the book using the word favorite and not best, and that's because even though everything in here made such a positive impression on me, that's not going to be true for everyone. And so I do want to point out some of the potential and very justifiable criticisms some people may be dissatisfied with. For example, I don't expect everyone to be as enthusiastic about the layout and design as I am. Yes, the layered nature of the scrapbook style means that you can include many more images, but that's done at the expense of having many images overlap other images, cutting them off so you can't see them in their whole unintrusive intruded upon glory. And I mean, for some books, that could be disastrous, but in my opinion, this book has been designed with enough intelligence that seems to be part of the consideration in how the works are displayed. So it was never an issue for me, but other people may not like it. What else? I already mentioned that the text is perhaps not as insightful as some might hope, but the big thing, the somewhat surprising, potentially disappointing similarity this book has with most other art books is that there's not a lot of exploration or evolution of designs or alternative or unused ideas, which is why I said at the start that being unfamiliar with the show probably made me enjoy the book even more than if I was a fan. Because, like, when I saw the design for the character Fishface, for example, I thought, a fish man with robot legs, how cool and interesting. But then I looked up a picture of him in the show and saw that he looks exactly the same as in the artwork. And so if I'd already seen that in the show, it would not have been as cool and interesting to see him looking exactly the same in the book. So I think that could be very disappointing for fans, how heavily the book relies on showing final designs. Again, I can't really speak to this with much authority, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that most of the stuff is pretty close to the final design you see on screen. Though I will say, unlike most other animation art books that also do this one has the decency to frequently make sure the art itself is visually appealing in its own right. For example, here's something you might typically see in an animation art book, just the turnaround line art for a character, very boring. Thankfully, this is one of the very rare instances of this book using something like that. Instead, what is much more common is something like this. I usually don't like black and white sketches, but look at how cool this style is for a sketch. Look at how, compared to what's below or regular sort of sketches you see in other art books, look at how much more interesting and visually appealing that is, even if it is largely how the final design looks on screen. There's so much going on here to explore. I don't exactly know how you'd describe this, but it's very much the predominant style for the sketches in this book, which is awesome. And again, very reflective of the crammed, wild, but detailed nature of the scrapbook style. And then you've got all the handwritten notes surrounding the drawings. Again, the content of the book and the design of the book are in perfect harmony. In terms of further reading, for anyone who's a fan of TMNT in general, there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Ultimate Visual History. It's a book about the franchise as a whole. It even has pages on this 2012 series as well. I've never read it, but just from flicking through, it looked very good, particularly because of the inclusion of physical reproductions of certain documents. So yeah, if you're a TMNT fan in general, you'll certainly want to look into that book as well. And then there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Autobiography, and it's a pretty cool art book, but really only going to be of interest to fans of Kevin Eastman's original comics. But as far as this book's concerned, if you are a fan of the show, getting this book should be a no-brainer. Do it now. But also, it's so cool to find a book that has an appeal that goes beyond the fandom. This isn't just a great TMNT art book, this is a great art book, period. And I can feel comfortable recommending it to anyone else who has never seen the show if you like what you see, because this is what an art book should be. Beautiful and exciting and creative and fun and inspiring. And I also like that for all my lamentations about how lackluster most art books are for animation, it took an art book for a show I've never seen to remind me just how great they can be and of all the things that make animation totally radical.